Picture a young girl, dressed in linen and gold, standing beneath the high stone arches of a palace not her own. She is 13 years old and already crowned. Her face is pale not from fear, but from the weight of expectation. Behind her, the court chants words older than memory. Before her, a man twice her age extends his hand, not in affection, but in ceremony. The room smells of oil, sweat, crushed petals, and something more ancient, the dust of a history that has crushed others before her. Before we begin, if you value stories like this, hidden histories told with care and gravity, consider subscribing. Let us know where you're listening from. These are the stories too quiet for textbooks, yet too human to ignore. The girl's name was Anasta. Born in the early 16th century in a Balkan court overshadowed by war, empire, and holy fire, she was chosen not for her lineage, which was modest, but for her womb. The royal astrologers had spoken. A moonchild would ensure continuity. A pale one, born beneath frost, with fingers like willow buds. She would be the vessel. Anasta's village had rejoiced. Her parents wept. It was not love they felt, not even pride, but a grief so ancient it had no language. The kind of grief peasants carried when one of their children was claimed by the needs of the powerful. No one refused the palace. They merely watched as the carriage took her. Experts say royal courts of the early modern period often selected young brides based not on alliance or dowry, but on physiological traits thought to indicate fertility: wide hips, unblemished skin, regular bleeding. Historians have noted that in such systems, a queen was less a sovereign and more a field, to be plowed, to be seeded, and to be judged by what she did or did not yield. Anasta arrived at court with hands trained to carry bread, not scepters. She was taught to walk in measured steps, to speak in curtsies, to eat in silence. A woman named Maria was assigned to her, part nurse, part warden, who explained things without kindness: how to perfume herself to mask peasant blood, how to lower her eyes before men, how to wait. She was crowned with crimson and gold thread, beneath frescoes of Mary and Judith. She did not know what Judith had done. She thought queens were holy. She did not know that queens bled like livestock if they failed to give what they were taken for. The man she married, King Stefan, was not cruel by temperament, but by custom. He was taught, as his fathers had been, that the prosperity of the realm grew from two things: strong borders and fertile women. He had both, or so he believed, until months turned into years, and Anasta's belly remained flat. There were no children, and with the absence of children came whispers, then consultations, then examinations. She was still only 15, and somewhere deep in the bone of the palace the first room was prepared, a room with no windows, a room where women bled not from nature but from hands. The first time they took her, it was with ceremony. 2 women, veiled, gloved, entered her chambers in silence, accompanied by the physician priest and a steward bearing folded cloth. It was spring, but the windows remained shut. Anasta was told to lie down on the embroidered couch and remove her underdress. She asked why. No one answered. According to medical historians, examinations of royal women in early modern Europe and the Balkans often took the form of ritualized invasions, part diagnosis, part performance of power. The woman's body became a site of political transparency, her insides no longer her own, but a matter of national security. They said they were checking for signs of obstruction. They used instruments shaped like spoons, like slender knives. They whispered about a womb too cold, a cervix too closed, a pulse too weak. They bled her afterwards, just in case. The king did not attend, but he asked for a report. From that day forward, Anasta's movements were restricted. Her meals were laced with herbs. She was instructed to sleep on her left side, to bathe only in water blessed with salt and myrrh. On holy days, she was led into the chapel and made to kneel for hours, praying not for peace but for fertility. Maria whispered behind her, "You must not anger God by being empty." Within the court, the queen's barrenness became a source of both curiosity and disdain. The noblewomen avoided her eyes. Servants took to muttering that perhaps she was cursed. A tapestry was removed from her chambers. It had depicted a mother nursing twins. It was replaced by an icon of St. Anne, Mother of the Virgin, whose womb had been opened by divine will. The message was clear. If Anasta could not produce, it was a failure of spirit. The queen's identity once tethered to her crown, was being rewritten through her silence. She was no longer the girl chosen by prophecy. She was now a cautionary figure, a womb that had not bloomed. One advisor to the king, a man named Vukan, emerged as a key antagonist in her slow unmaking. A former theologian turned court scholar, he believed deeply in sacred order and biological duty. He had once written that infertility in a consecrated woman is a rupture in God's plan, and the state must act to mend it. He did not believe in evil, only in balance. And to him, Anasta was imbalance incarnate. It was Vukan who proposed the rite. In older chronicles, mostly forgotten, he had read of a womb-warming practice once used by Slavic midwives and monastic healers. A combination of smoke, heat, bloodletting, and confinement. It was never meant for queens, but he believed desperation justified revival. King Stefan, reluctant but cornered, agreed. He insisted it be done with care, behind closed doors. But history does not remember care. It remembers what followed. The rite would last 3 nights. It would begin with isolation. On the eve of the ritual, Maria undid Anasta's braids and led her through a hallway she had never seen. The walls grew narrow, the air dry. They descended. The room was neither dungeon nor chamber. It was something in between, a place designed to look holy while functioning as punishment. Incense burned at the corners. The bedding was straw, not silk. A small bowl of herbs steamed in the center. The door closed behind her with a sound that did not echo. It was too thick. Nothing inside that room could echo. She was 16, and her body was about to become a theater of belief. The first night passed in silence. No voices reached her. No one explained what would happen. The room smelled of burnt rosemary and rusted iron. A single candle sputtered in a recess above the door, and the shadows it cast moved like ribs, bending and folding across the ceiling. Anasta lay awake on the straw, her hands pressed between her knees. The warmth from the herb bowl had long since faded. In the records of other queens, Polish, Serbian, Hungarian, there are similar silences. Moments where their names vanish from court documents for weeks or months, only to reappear afterward bearing titles like purified or re-sanctified. These gaps, historians believe, conceal not just absence but ordeal. At dawn, 2 women entered. Their faces were covered not with veils, but with waxy linen that sealed the mouth. They did not speak. One carried a small brazier, the other a wooden spoon and a cloth soaked in some dark resin. They rubbed the resin on her belly and inner thighs, then they lit the brazier. Smoke filled the room, dense and heavy with something sweet, perhaps myrrh or dried rue. It made her gag. Her skin prickled. One of the women placed the spoon near the brazier, then pressed its rounded edge against her lower abdomen, holding it there as long as Anasta could bear. When she flinched, she was struck lightly across the shoulder. A correction, a ritual correction. This was the warming. According to medieval medical manuals from Constantinople and Kiev, heat was often believed to awaken a sleeping womb or drive out spiritual frost. In children, it was used to hasten puberty. In women, to restore bleeding. In queens, it was never intended to heal, only to justify what came next. By the second night, the pain began. She was bled behind the knees and ankles. The brazier returned, but this time the smoke smelled of burning hair. The cloths pressed against her belly were hotter. Her skin blistered. She was not allowed to touch water. Her lips cracked. Her urine turned dark, but she said nothing. It was not stoicism, it was a form of disassociation. Experts in historical trauma refer to this as ritual dissociation, when the mind severs itself from the body in response to orchestrated harm, disguised as custom. Many women subjected to such rites describe a moment when the body feels like it belongs to someone else. An offering, a vessel, a wound performing on command. Anasta no longer thought in days, only in thresholds. The feel of the air when the door opened, the sound of footsteps, the moment just before the heat touched her again. On the third night, the man came. He wore the vestments of a monk, but was no true priest. His hands smelled of ash and wine. He read from a scroll in a tongue she did not know, words that hissed and looped like thorns. Then he gestured to her stomach and muttered a prayer that was not a blessing. He made a cut, shallow, precise, just beneath her navel, not with a blade, but with a sharpened sliver of bone. A sacrificial act, he called it. a symbolic opening of the womb. She did not scream. She simply went still, as if her skin had decided to become stone. And then it ended. They left her there, bandaged and bleeding, for another day. When she was returned to her chambers, no one spoke of it again. The wound closed in time, but something else had opened. Something in her posture, her voice, her gaze. She was never the same girl again. She had become the shape the court required, a queen hollowed for hope, a symbol stitched with silence. For a time, the palace behaved as though nothing had happened. Curtains were changed, court functions resumed, and Anasta was expected to attend them. Upright, powdered, dressed in brocade stiff enough to hide her trembling. Her crown, though slightly loosened to accommodate her recurring headaches, remained fixed atop her skull. Those who passed her bowed, yet their eyes carried a new form of calculation. Not reverence, not sympathy, but the cold inspection reserved for damaged goods still under warranty. The months that followed became known to archivists as the apparition years, so called not for what was done, but for what was undone. Anasta ceased to inhabit the world in the way others did. She moved, she smiled, she prayed, but always a breath removed, like a saint embalmed prematurely, like a statue in motion. According to one court chronicler, whose writings were rediscovered only in the late 20th century, the queen no longer ate food so much as remembered the act of eating. Her appetite was reserved for silence. Some maids claimed she forgot their names. Others swore she wandered the halls at night, murmuring, as if reciting verses no one had taught her. Her presence disturbed even the stone. But she bled again. It came not with force, but like an apology, a soft return of something long banished. The chambermaids were the first to see the stains. One wept. Another crossed herself. Maria said nothing, only changed the bedsheets and sent word. The court rejoiced, cautiously. The king permitted a muted celebration, a small gathering in the eastern courtyard, where musicians played low, and pastries were served with pomegranate and fig. Anasta sat among them in a gown of silver-threaded blue, her smile practiced, her abdomen wrapped tight beneath her stays. The bleeding meant the rite had restored balance, or so Vukan proclaimed, but the deeper implication was more troubling. If this cycle did not result in conception, there would be no more veils of care, no more symbolic rites, only replacement. In early modern monarchies, barrenness was a failure not of health, but of function. A queen without children was a queen out of season. According to reproductive historian Dr. Elena Vasik, such women became hauntings in waiting. Preserved outwardly, erased inwardly, their survival permitted only until succession demanded another vessel. Anasta knew this, though no one had told her directly. She read it in the eyes of the steward who now served her meals without bowing, in the way Maria avoided mentioning children, in the new girl, Katarina, assigned to her chambers, who was younger, softer, and unmarked. Katarina did not know, not yet. She smiled too easily, hummed while brushing Anasta's hair, asked naive questions about the king's favorite dishes. She had come from a noble family fallen on hard times, the kind that offered daughters in exchange for proximity. She thought her position an honor. Anasta began to watch her, not cruelly, not possessively, but like one might watch a candle set too close to a curtain. Winter came, and with it, another bleed, and then another. The palace held its breath. The king visited her chamber for the first time in over a year. He entered quietly, sat on the edge of her chair, and asked nothing of her body. Instead, he looked at her face, as if trying to remember a different version of it, one not shaped by failed rites and forced silences. He touched her hand. She let him. The room was too still to resist. Some scholars argued that King Stefan's behavior in these later years reveals a quiet disillusionment with Vukan's ideology, a man torn between duty and the image of his wife as more than a vessel. But kings do not confess regret. They act, they delay, they substitute. And so, while he did not dismiss Anasta, he allowed Katarina's elevation, from handmaiden to favored attendant, a distinction with no clear title, but many implications. It is unclear when the queen began her quiet campaign. There are no letters, no manifestos, only small traces, like footprints left in ash. She began requesting books, not romances, not scripture, but texts on midwifery, herbology, and female saints who had suffered for the sake of lineages. She wrote long prayers in her own hand, though the ink was sometimes smudged by tremors. She commissioned a tapestry of Saint Thecla, the woman who defied kings, bled in the wilderness, and was not consumed. She asked that it be hung in the hallway, outside her chambers. And then she fasted, not out of devotion, but out of control. In courts where a woman's body was an asset, to deny it nourishment was an act of resistance. Or so some feminist historians have proposed. They suggest that queens like Anasta weaponized frailty, making themselves holy through absence, ethereal through refusal. It was a thin line between martyr and ghost. By spring, her figure had changed. Her skin looked almost translucent in candlelight. Rumors began again that the queen was wasting, that she had taken ill, that Caterina was with child. None were confirmed. All were believed. One evening, during the Feast of Ascension, Anasta collapsed. She was carried not to the physician-priest, but to the chapel, where the king himself stood beside her for the first time in public since their wedding. He wept, though only once. The court did not record it, the chronicler did. And beneath the frescoes of Mary and Judith, the same under which she had been crowned, Anasta was made to kneel once more. But this time no prayers were spoken. Only the hush of a crowd unsure whether it was watching a death or a transformation. The king ordered a retreat from public life for her. Caterina was moved to a wing farther from the throne room. Vukan's influence waned. His writings, once cited in council, were quietly excluded from new edicts. But Anasta did not return to life as it had been. She did not speak of children. She no longer sought restoration. Instead, she asked for one thing: the key to the garden behind the chapel, a place overgrown and unused. There she would walk each morning, veiled, barefoot, silent. The grass grew tall. The herbs she planted, mugwort, pennyroyal, motherwort, bloomed quietly. She had no heir, but the garden bore fruit, and in the eyes of those who served her, the queen had become something else entirely. Not a vessel, not a symbol, a relic and a warning. The garden grew. In the records of the outer servants, those who cleaned, planted, delivered, the queen was now called the Veiled, not as a title of shame, but of detachment. She had entered a new category of womanhood, not maiden, not mother, not widow, something else, the walking echo of a failed miracle. She no longer ate with the court, she no longer answered to bells, yet no one dared strip her of her crown, not while the king still paused before her door on feast days, not while Caterina's womb remained undecided. What the council had failed to foresee was the power of stillness. In palaces of blood and silk, rebellion was expected to come with fire, with armed factions or poison or letters smuggled in shoes. Anasta did none of this. She wrote no manifestos. She touched no blades. She simply endured, and by enduring, she rewrote the limits of her role. Historians of gender and monarchy have called this a form of quiet regency, where a woman, denied heirs and power, governs through presence alone. The relic becomes shrine. The victim becomes law, not through command, but through the discomfort of permanence. For 3 years Anasta remained. She did not speak to Caterina nor inquire about the girl's private audiences with the king. When the younger woman began to look hollow-eyed and pale, it was Maria who noticed first. The same signs Anasta had once carried. The court physician suggested Caterina was imbalanced, and a new round of consultations began, but no rites, no sealed rooms. The palace had learned its lesson, or so it pretended. Vukan was gone by then, exiled to a minor monastery on the borderlands, his name removed from the royal liturgy. Some said he died in silence, praying for order. Others claimed he tried to write one final treatise on the dangers of wombs left unattended, but that the pages were burned. Anasta did not ask. Instead, she gathered her women. By the end of the 3rd year, her chambers were no longer attended by court-appointed maids, but by women she chose herself, not for loyalty, not for birth, but for what they remembered. One had lost a sister in childbirth after an unwanted wedding. Another had survived a failed monastic confinement. All of them had bled for someone else's cause, and all of them understood silence. They tended the garden with her. They learned the names of herbs in 3 languages. They studied blood under sunlight and recorded cycles by the moon. They read scripture, but only the apocryphal texts, the ones where women bled on altars and angels turned away. What they were building was not rebellion, it was memory. Experts in archival resistance, a term coined by modern historians of empire and trauma, describe such efforts as rituals of presence, to endure without explanation, to write without audience, to refuse the erasure that power demands. These women were archivists not of state but of harm. Their records were not parchment but posture, not ink but survival. When Katerina miscarried, it was Anasta who sent the herbs. Not the palace blend, the one used to suppress pain, but her own, bitter, slow, grounding. There was no note, no message, only a pouch of dark leaves left beside the girl's chamber door, with a single sprig of motherwort tied in ribbon. Katerina never thanked her, but she began to visit the garden. Not daily, not openly, but often enough for others to notice. The king, now visibly aged, did not interfere. He began speaking more often of God's will and the thinning line of inheritance. He ordered a chapel built beside the old garden, but he never entered it himself. It was during this time that rumors reached the outer courts, of strange gatherings at dusk, women kneeling in the herbs, chants not from liturgy, but from folk songs older than the palace itself. No names were named, no accusations made. The kingdom, after all, had peace. The queen had not rebelled, and yet something was shifting. The final record from this period is not a royal edict nor a religious decree, but a tapestry. It depicts a tree, gnarled, bare, beneath a night sky. Beneath it a woman kneels. Her hands are outstretched. From her womb, not children, but roots descend into the soil, curling like script. Above her, stars form the shape of a crown. There is no face. It hangs now in the National Museum, labeled only Unknown Queen, Balkan region, circa 16th century. But those who know the garden know her name, and those who walk barefoot through rosemary and ash know that silence, too, is a form of legacy. The queen disappeared in spring, not in the way queens are removed, or through exile, annulment, or death, but in the older way, the way reserved for saints and shadows. One morning, the palace awoke and found her chambers empty. The door was locked from within. The garden, trampled by wind. The mirror left uncovered. Her crown lay on the floor beside the prayer stool, tilted slightly, as if set down in the dark. There was no blood, no message, no scent of flight, only absence, carefully arranged. Historians debate what happened. Some believe she walked beyond the wall at dawn and vanished into the hills. Others argue she took sanctuary in one of the borderland convents, the ones unmarked on court maps, where women who had seen too much were permitted to forget. A few insist she died within the palace, buried in secret beneath the chapel floor, her name never carved. There is no consensus, only speculation and silence. But her legacy remained, and it began to move. Katerina, once golden, never recovered from her loss. Her health failed slowly, in stages. She was not punished, only permitted to fade. Within 2 years, she was gone. Some said she had grown too close to Anasta, and thus carried the same shadow. Others claimed she died of unresolved grief, a phrase court physicians favored when faced with women they could not mend. King Stephen remarried once more, a French noblewoman, younger, devout, fluent in the language of succession. She bore him a child, a son, pale and small, who died before winter. The king never tried again. By then his beard had gone to snow, and his hands trembled when he signed decrees. He rarely left his private wing. The kingdom, once defined by strength and heirs, became a place of memory, and then of doubt. And still, the garden grew. No one was assigned to tend it, yet no weeds overtook it. The herbs continued to flower in unseasonal rhythms. Local women, summoned to court for other tasks, began requesting to walk near it. Not inside, just near. As if the soil remembered something their bodies did not. In one account, written by a foreign ambassador who visited the palace decades later, he describes the garden as a curious anomaly, untamed yet oddly reverent, like a grave never marked but never neglected. He did not know the queen's name, but he noted that women bowed before stepping past its gate. The court archives list Anasta as missing, not deceased. A bureaucratic compromise, but absence, when sustained long enough, becomes its own presence. Over time, young noblewomen spoke of her not as a queen, but as something older, a figure invoked in whispers, especially by those who bled too early, or not at all. To carry Anasta, they would say, meant to carry silence, to choose stillness over submission, to leave a wound open, not to heal, but to remember. In theological texts of the early 17th century, a peculiar symbol begins to appear, a circle with no center. Some scholars link it to Anasta, a womb emptied by design, a crown set down, a warning against kingdoms that consume their own queens. And in the museum, beneath the tapestry of the woman tree, the curators eventually placed a plaque. It reads, "She bore no heirs, but she left root. It is the only official acknowledgement she ever received. But for the women who still gather herbs in silence, for the girls taught to mistrust prophecy, for the barren and the bruised and the quiet, she needs no title. She has already been written into the body, into the soil, into the long, unbroken sentence of history that refuses to end with a child. History prefers clean endings, a crown passed, a child born, a tomb sealed. But Anasta's story defied all three. She left behind no body, no bloodline, no monument, only questions. And questions, unlike heirs, do not die. They scatter. They seed. They grow in places no scribe would think to look. In the monastery archives of southern Dalmatia, there is a prayer stitched in red onto faded linen. May the wound remember more than the sword. It is unsigned, but its dialect matches the region of Anasta's birth. Scholars speculate it was part of a secret devotion, not to saints but to the unnamed, the ones who were taken and never returned. In the margins of a midwife's manual, dated 100 years later, a note appears beside the description of womb-cleansing smoke. Do not perform on unwilling girls. Let the silence of the queen be your warning. And in the folklore of certain Balkan villages, passed from grandmothers to daughters over coals and broth, there are still tales of a barefoot queen who walked into the woods and became a tree. Her fruit, they say, cannot be eaten, only touched. It is bitter, and it weeps sap. And if you press it to your chest, your dreams will tell you what you are not ready to remember. There are no portraits of her. There are no dates of death. There is no lineage. And yet she persists, not as ghost, not as martyr, but as fracture, as memory's refusal to fade, as the shape a woman's body leaves when it is emptied of duty but not of will. In every palace that still teaches girls how to kneel before blessing, in every document that names a woman only by what she bore, in every silent hallway where power echoes louder than speech, she waits, not to be vindicated, only to be seen,